How the church acts. This is, we've been going through this series for the whole summer. And yes, by the way, this is my summer's not over shirt. It is still summer. I don't care what it says outside, okay? And we're going to be going through this a good part of October as well, taking a look at the book of Acts and what it meant for a group of people to have to figure out how to follow Jesus Christ, even though they had just had him leave, and what it means for us to do the same thing today. And today we're going to follow him right into the eye of the storm, which is where Paul is headed. And as I read this and reread this section of Acts, we're going to be in most of Acts 21 today. The image that just kept coming back to me over and over and over again was this one. Now, before we talk about storm chasers, I got to ask, do we have any storm chasers in here? We had one. We actually had, what, in Nebraska? Did you go chase them though? Okay, you saw them, but you didn't think, hey, look, there's a tornado, let's go drive to it and touch it, right? Like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is a thing, right? Like, you know this if you live. This is like a real thing. Thousands of people hear about these giant storms and then drive towards them to get photos and videos. What I want to do is show you guys a video of a guy who's been doing this for 20 years. Just take a look. Is he talking about a woman or a tornado? Like a dreamy EF4. Like, listen to this guy and how excited he gets about these storms, right? And did you notice when he was talking about the big one, I think he called it the mega tornado, right? 8 people, before we take this too lightly, 8 people lost their lives because of this storm. And 4 of them, half of them, were storm chasers. Meaning, they didn't have the tornado come to them. They went to it. And they lost their lives because this is serious stuff, right? And most of us, we watch this stuff or we hear about these things and we run. We escape from these things because inside many of us is this desire for self-preservation, right? I think it's something that happens really automatic and naturally when we're born and we're raised. We just recognize if things aren't right, we're going to try to make it right. And if we can't do it, we cry and hope that someone else is going to do it for us, right? We just have in each of us this desire to preserve and take care of ourselves. And then Jesus came along and said what? You want to save your life? Lose it. Give it. And if you give it, actually, for me, you will find it. There's a really big contrast there. Why would we voluntarily head right into the storm like Jesus did and like Paul is going to do? And so when we look at this today, I want you to picture that. That storm in Jerusalem as the center of that storm. And when we start in on 21, we've got what I call Paul's Palm Sunday tour. He is headed towards Jerusalem. Last week, if you remember, we left him right around here, right around the middle of this map in Miletus. And he comes down on what must have been a really beautiful boat ride, by the way, over here to Patara, all the way over here to Tyre, then Ptolemy, then Caesarea, and Jerusalem. And as he goes, he knows exactly where he's going. And he has a sense of what's going to happen when he gets there. And yet people are encouraging him as he goes and then discouraging him from going there, which should sound a lot like what happened with Jesus as he headed towards Jerusalem. But he goes, and this is what happens to him on the way. So let's take a read at 1 through 14. When we had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Cos, and the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. When we found a ship bound for Phoenicia, we went on board and set sail. We came in sight of Cyprus, and leaving it on our left, we sailed to Syria and landed at Tyre, because the ship was to unload its cargo there. We looked up the disciples and stayed there for 7 days. Through the Spirit, they told Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. When our days there were ended, we left and proceeded on our journey, and all of them, with wives and children, escorted us outside the city. There we knelt down on the beach and prayed and said farewell to one another. Then we went on board the ship, and they returned home. When we had finished the voyage from Tyre, we arrived at Ptolemy, and we greeted the believers and stayed with them for 1 day. The next day we left and came to Caesarea, and we went into the house of Philip the evangelist, one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who had the gift of prophecy. While we were staying there for several days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. He came to us and took Paul's belt, bound his own feet and hands with it, and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is the way, the Jews in Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles." When we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. Then Paul answered, "What are you doing? Weeping and breaking my heart. For I am ready not only to be bound, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." Since he would not be persuaded, we remain silent, except to say, "The Lord's will be done." Good answer. Finally, they realize how to respond to Paul and where he is going. And it's fascinating to me, here in verse 4, the Bible says, through the Spirit, they told Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. Do you know why Paul is going to Jerusalem? The Spirit told Paul to go to Jerusalem. So here's Paul thinking, I'm going to Jerusalem because the Spirit's leading me to Jerusalem. And here's a bunch of people saying, through the Spirit, don't go to Jerusalem. Now it could be that what they're communicating here is through the Spirit they told Paul, meaning they didn't use their lips and their mouths and their words, they just sent him a message through the Spirit. Or it could mean there's some people who don't quite get what the Spirit wants Paul to do. But the reality is, the thing that we've got to remember as people who follow Jesus Christ is there is one Holy Spirit. There are, what is it, like 7.6 billion of us, different people, right? But one Holy Spirit. And we've got to be so careful when we say things like, the Spirit told me, fill in the blank. Or, God has a word for me for you. And then we fill that in. We've got to be so careful when we try to do that. Ever tell you guys the story when my wife was pregnant with our first kid, and we had someone come up to us and say, hey, God has a word for you. Your child's going to be a boy. Have you met my daughter? Like, that literally happened. And we didn't know at the time, so we're just like, okay, thank you for telling us. Right? But we have to be really, really careful when we say stuff like this. And the good news is, though, we actually have a check. We have a way to check whether something is of the Spirit and of God or not. And it's this amazing book. It's the Bible. If the Spirit says it's going to be out of this book or it's going to be consistent with this book. What we can do is we can actually do a test. So Paul said that the Spirit is leading him to Jerusalem. So if I'm Paul and I'm like, I want to check and make sure that this is the Spirit or not, he can go to the Bible. Now granted, he didn't have the Bible like we have it today, right? But he had a lot of this Old Testament and he had a lot of the New Testament relating to the way of Jesus. What were the things that Jesus did? So if I'm Paul, I can look back and I don't have to turn back that far, right? And say, go to Jerusalem. I think Jesus did that. And I have a sense that when I go to Jerusalem, things are going to be kind of hard. Is that exactly what happened to Jesus? Maybe this is consistent, right? It's consistent with the Word of God. This is probably something I should be doing. And so to Jerusalem he goes. Now on the way he hears from a bunch of different people. Personally, there's these 4 unmarried daughters, all who had the gift of prophecy. I would have loved to know what they had said to him, if anything. But we get to hear from this guy, Agabus. Agabus is a different kind of a prophet. We don't get to hear a lot about these guys. I call them performance prophets. They don't just say it, they do it. And so he goes to Paul and he says, hey, can I borrow your belt? And he uses this belt and he wraps it around his wrists and around his ankles. And he said, the one who owns this belt, when he gets to Jerusalem, this is going to happen to him. And in fact, he's completely right. Now he says it, and then a bunch of people who hear this try to say, Paul, don't go. We don't want this to happen to you. And I get that they love him, right? But they're saying, don't go on this mission that God has clearly called you to go on. And so Paul responds pretty strongly. He says, what are you doing? Weeping and breaking my heart. For I'm ready not only to be bound, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. Not thanks for Karen. That's a better idea. I'm going to do that and stay here and stay safe. He's really adamant. He says, what are you doing? Crying and breaking my heart. I'm ready to go. I know there's a storm there. And I'm going. Because the Spirit has said, that's where I need to go. That's my mission. And to be clear, Paul's not doing it for the storm's sake. Right? He's not doing it for the rush. He's not doing it for the photos. He's not doing it for the videos. He's doing it because Paul really is a Jesus chaser. He's like, well, that's where Jesus went? That's where I need to go. And yeah, I've heard, by the way, it's going to be tough, but it was really tough for Jesus. And he still went, so I'm going to go. And as you guys process this, where Jesus went, where Paul's going, I think there's one question for each and every one of us that we have to answer. And you don't have to answer it for me. But the question we have to answer, I think every single day, is if God called you to go somewhere hard, would you go? If God called you to go somewhere difficult, challenging, maybe even painful, would you go? I believe in a God who calls us to do hard things. And not all the time. Sometimes God calls us to do remarkable, affirming, encouraging, joyous things. But sometimes He says, I need you to go and do this, and it's not going to be pretty. But it's going to be amazing. And I am going to use this to draw so many people to me. And so I raise that question for you guys. I would really encourage you to think about it this morning, today, this weekend, the rest of the week, the rest of the month, maybe the rest of the year. If God called you to go somewhere hard, would you go? And I don't know where that is. Because each of us are different, right? I don't know if that's a permanent relocation. I don't know if that's just going with us on one of our mission trips. Maybe it's 2 weeks, someplace uncomfortable. Maybe it's just going out to Five Rock for a few days. Maybe you don't have to go anywhere at all, but God's calling you to do something hard, difficult, painful. Maybe He's calling you to go and be reconciled with fill in the blank. Maybe He's calling you to go and just say, I forgive you. Maybe He's calling you to say, I'm sorry. Maybe He's calling you to give something. Maybe He's calling you to say something difficult and challenging and hard. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not God. Jesus understood this, and Paul definitely gets this. And I think the people here, I think they finally start to realize it. After they said what they said, and then Paul said what he said, they get silent, and they said, the Lord's will be done. Pretty good answer, right? When we pray, this is how we should pray. For God's will, not yours, and not mine. Right? Pray for the Lord's will to be done. And this isn't easy. At least it's not for me. I don't know you guys, sometimes I kind of like my will. I kind of like my plans sometimes, you know? And it's hard to finish that with what Jesus said on His knees in the Garden of Gethsemane that said, yet, not my will, but yours be done. That's the prayer. So yeah, pray, ask, talk with God. But just throw in there at some point, Lord, your will be done, not ours. Let Him know you're open. Let Him know you're ready. Jesus did it. Paul definitely did it. Now I think the people are starting to catch on. Let's look at 15 through 26. After these days, we got ready and started to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of Manasseh of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to stay. When we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us warmly. The next day, Paul went with us to visit James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard it, they praised God. Then they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands of believers there are among the Jews, and they're all zealous for the law. They've been told about you, that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them not to circumcise their children or observe the customs. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Join these men. Go through the rite of purification with them, and pay for the shaving of their heads. Thus all will know that there's nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself observe and guard the law. But as for the Gentiles who have become believers, we've sent a letter with our judgment, that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having purified himself, he entered the temple with them, making public the completion of the days of purification, when the sacrifice would be made for each of them. So after his long trip Paul finally makes it to Jerusalem, and we're told that he gets a really warm welcome. And as part of that warm welcome, he shares some remarkable stories and testimony about what God has done. And I'm going to say this to you guys again, and frankly, I'm going to keep saying it to you guys until you take me up on this. The church needs your testimony. This church and the global church. This book is full of the testimony of God doing amazing things through ordinary people like me and you. And we need to hear it. We really need to hear it. The women had this Ministries to Women event, and they had several of you women get up front and boldly and confidently and humbly share testimony of what God had done through their lives. I have heard rave reviews about this event. Every woman there encouraged, hopeful. They felt closer as part of that. The plan for the guys' retreat, our whole plan, our whole spiritual plan for the retreat, this is it. The testimony of what God does through the ordinary guys of this church. We all need to hear this, though. And I know that it can be tough to get up here and a bunch of people and share your testimony. But again, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe you're just deathly afraid of doing that. You say, hey, Scott, I'll write it down. And maybe someone can read it. Yeah, we can do that. We can have someone read your testimony. Maybe you can just come on in. We have video cameras now, like all of us, right, in our pockets. And we could record it and share it both services so people could really hear what God has done through you. We need to hear this. And I'm serious. I'm going to keep bringing this up until you guys take me up on it, because it encourages. It brings us closer to God, and I think it also gives us a little oomph to do what we can to share that testimony, not just in here, but outside of these doors as well. So Paul shares all of this, and then there's this whole ordeal about getting Paul purified. And scholars who are way smarter than me have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it was that they were trying to purify Paul from. I mean, they know generally what they were trying to do, right? They're trying to get the guy ready to go into the temple. But if you look at Paul, you got to remember he's Jewish, and he's been walking around sharing God's law. So what in the world are we purifying Paul from? There's a couple of theories about this. The first one I think is kind of the funniest. The theory is because he had been around too many Gentiles. Like too many non-Jews, and they had like rubbed off on him somehow, and they had to clean him up and purify him to get him into the temple. That's the first theory. The second one is Eutychus. You guys remember Eutychus? Young guy who had the decision to listen to Paul's late night sermon on the third floor, sitting in the open window, right? Fell out, of course hit the pavement. That did not go well. And what did Paul do? He ran outside and he touched him. He held him, and that man came back to life. But remember, for Jews, touching a dead body, big no-no. And so some think because he did that, which had the beautiful happy ending, right? Because he did that, he had to get purified to get ready to go into the temple. And the reason the Bible says he had to go into the temple is because the sacrifice would be made for each of them. Because when you have a sacrifice, right, that sacrifice has to be perfectly clean. Whatever it is you give has to be all cleaned up and pure. But I think that what's going on here isn't just purification for the sacrifice for Paul. I think it's purification of Paul because of the coming sacrifice of Paul. You see, Paul has an inkling of where this is headed. And he knows if this happened to Jesus, this could happen to him. And so he is getting purified, and he is getting ready. And then this happens. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia who had seen him in the temple stirred up the whole crowd. They seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who's teaching everyone everywhere against our people, our law, and this place. More than that, he's actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. And immediately the doors were shut. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Immediately he took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. When they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came, arrested him, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. When Paul came to the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him!" So right before the process is complete, this group steps in. We've heard of these people before, those Asian Jews. And they do what they did every single time, right? They stirred stuff up. And they raised this complaint about Paul. And did you notice that not only is it not true, it has nothing to do with God. It's about things that Paul allegedly did against our people, our place, our law. Nothing to do with God. Isn't that just like most complaints, right? Has nothing to do with violating anything with respect to God, just a complaint from person to person. And none of it has anything to do with God, and it's not true. They take him outside, and did you notice that he starts getting sentenced and then punished with no trial at all? They're trying to kill him. No sentence, no trial, nothing. Which I think gives us a chance just to be a little bit grateful for the system that we have. Now, I get that like our legal system is not perfect. Okay, I get that. But the reality is, our system is better than most. I mean, it's way better than this deal, right? And it's better than many systems around the world. And it's way better than this system. So I don't know if you're familiar with this quote, Gregory Allen Elliott, this one's on a t-shirt. It says, "The court of public opinion means nothing to me, and even less to itself." And I think what's happening here with Paul is an element of that court of public opinion. And it happened then, and it is still alive today. If you doubt that, just go online for like a minute, or just turn on the television. Right? How many shows now are just people sitting at a desk arguing together about anything from sports heroes, entertainers, to just complete and utter nonsense? And we watch. We watch. And then what do? We judge. Because that's why I love the second part of this quote. It says, not only the court of public opinion means nothing to me, it means even less to itself. Because think about it, the court of public opinion, it's run by no one. There's no ultimate judge, there's no rules, there's no appeal process. It's just a bunch of us mini judges, right? Making decisions about people we don't know on less than complete information, sometimes false information. And it means absolutely nothing to itself, because we do that and we move on to someone else. And here, they do it to Paul, and they're about to kill him. They're about to kill him, and in steps this tribune of the cohort. Just very literally, this guy is a leader of 1,000 soldiers. So a ton of soldiers that step in because things are getting really out of hand, and they try to put a stop to this. And one of the things you're going to notice as Paul moves forward now, there's going to be military around quite a bit. The scale of how controversial he is, who he represents, how he's trying to get people to follow Jesus is so upsetting that you're going to find the military is around quite a bit now with Paul. This is a really big deal. And I don't want you to miss the irony of this, okay? This is Paul. I almost wish like Paul didn't get the name changed so we always remember Saul. Right? But the reality is this is Paul who used to be Saul. Right? The guy who was a persecutor of Christians. And now he's a persecuted Christian. And I picture what might be going through his mind, like what's going through his heart as all this is happening. How could this happen? All these people rising up just to take someone's life and then thinking, I know exactly how this can happen. I used to condone and support this type of thing happening. And now here he is, and he deserves none of this. Right? The things that are said aren't true. The way they're treating him and punishing him and hurting him are just flat out wrong. Right? And the things that they're literally saying about this guy are totally untrue. We can actually break it down. They say, here's a guy who's trying to violate the law. Okay? Not supporting the law. The very same guy who encouraged Timothy to be circumcised according to that law. Even though, remember, Timothy didn't have to do that because he's half Greek and he's half Jew. So no, he's not trying to get people to go against the law. This is the same guy who took the Nazirite vow. You can't not support a law and then follow the vows of that exact same law. They say he's rising up against the people, but this is the same Paul who observed the same feasts and traditions that they did. And last but not least, there's a specific thing that said that Paul is going around telling Jews that they don't have to be circumcised. And that's just not true. You guys remember we went through that section of Acts where they had the Jerusalem Council and there was the big meeting and they sent a letter out after that meeting? And that letter said that Gentiles, not Jews, did not have to be circumcised. There's nothing that Paul is doing that is trying to violate this law. In fact, he's actually reaching out to these people, the Jewish people, to bring them to the saving knowledge and grace of Jesus Christ. And yet we read this stuff and we hear about this stuff, and I think there's this temptation that arises in us when we see this type of injustice. And we say, this is wrong, like someone's got to fix it. Or worse, this is wrong, I've got to fix it. And it's tempting, I get it. We have that sense inside of us of something's wrong and it needs to be taken care of. But sometimes we forget that we're not in charge of fixing it. Jesus remembered that. Paul remembered that. And they remember that God is a God whose way of resolving these types of things involves a storm. And as we take communion, I want you to think about the way of the storm that Jesus Christ walked for you and for me. He knew full well, like Paul, what he was heading into in Jerusalem. He knew that the storm was there. And he went. He knew that he'd have to go up that hill. And he went. He knew the weight of the cross. And he went. Why? Because you're worth it. Let's pray and take communion this morning. God, we thank you that you are in charge and we are not. I hope and pray, God, that we will be a people that more often in our prayers says, your will be done. God, may your will be done in the world and in our lives, including those storms, which you have said and we beautifully sung earlier that you will be with us during those storms. We welcome you. We look forward to you walking alongside us through those hard things that you call us to do. But God, please call us. And may we respond with a yes, remembering what you have done for us. As we take communion and we take the bread, we remember the body of Christ broken for us. As we take the cup of juice, we remember the blood of Christ poured out for us and for all. Right in the eye, the center of that storm. And once and for all, the message that radiated out was one of love. May we share that message. We do this in Jesus' name. Amen.